Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on how Development Bank can mainstream nature-based solutions for water security. I'm Naomi Noel, Senior Partnership Associate at the Nature Conservancy, and I'm going to be the moderator for this session today. For those of you who don't know the Nature Conservancy, we are a global leading conservation organization operating in more than 70 countries around the world, with a mission to protect the lands and waters on which all life depends. This is a session where we would like to talk about development experience with financing nature-based solutions for water security and discuss challenges and opportunities to mainstream NBS into their portfolio of water-related projects, and more broadly about how to accelerate Development Bank's funding for NBS for water security. So when we talk about water security, we refer to issues of quantity, whether scarcity or excess of water, water quality and accessibility of water resources. And up to these days, it is clear that grey infrastructure remains the dominant type of intervention to improve water security. There is, however, a growing movement to implement large-scale nature-based solutions or hybrid investment, as these solutions are increasingly perceived and seen as cost-effective strategies that can help generate significant co-benefits and thus help address the combined climate change and biodiversity crises. At the Nature Conservancy, we believe that DFIs have a critical role to play to accelerate this movement, as most of them are making commitments to increasing the targeting of their investment towards biodiversity and climate finance to address the twin challenge of biodiversity collapse and climate change. They are increasingly interested in incorporating NBS into the mix of their investment. But up to this point, their level of investment in this area has remained relatively low. So in this session, we hope to discuss and better understand what the GFIs that are represented here are doing to mainstream NBS for water security into their portfolio, and what are the possible pathways to accelerate their financing for NBS for water security, thinking about a wide range of options from capacity building to new financing tools. For this, we are going to start by a keynote speech from Sophie Trémollet, who leads the water team within the Environment Directorate at the OECD, which advises OECD member countries and partners on water economics and finance, as well as water quality challenges. Sophie joined, just going to show the session outline. So Sophie joined the OECD from the Nature Conservancy when she established the Europe Freshwater Programme. After this keynote speech, we'll have a panel with representatives from different development banks, including French Development Agency, European Investment Bank, Asian Development Bank, and World Bank, that I will introduce later, followed by a Q&A session. So Sophie, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to give a presentation that sets the scene, effectively. That's what I will be trying, because we have lots of people in this room who are familiar with the topic that we're discussing, some less so, so we want to have a common sort of level of knowledge. And as Naomi said, I joined the OECD recently as the water team lead. This is an area where we're looking to really bring more analytical work, more work, and focus at the highest level of policy making on the waterfront, because we do believe that increasing investment in nature can make a marked difference to water security. This is clear because water security depends on healthy freshwater systems, which has multiple dimensions, and healthy freshwater systems really underpin the ability to provide access to water, but also the topic of this year's conference, peace and security. And at the OECD, we've also been working as providing secretariat to the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. You may have have heard of it last year, for example. There was the launch of their initial report, and it's quite exciting because in October 2024, we'll have the final report of that commission, which brings together really representatives from various economic fields, the head of the WTO, the president of Singapore, etc. And they've been focusing on the fact that the global hydrological cycle is at risk of collapse, and that could have very significant consequences in terms of economic opportunities, but also, our ability to deliver water security. So there is work underway at the global level. Here we're going to look at what can be done on the ground and what can development finance institutions in particular contribute in order to bring this into their projects. And this is an exciting opportunity because we've been talking with DFIs for some time, a little bit behind closed doors, trying to understand what they are doing, each of them, and this is the first time that there is a full session on this at Stockholm World Water Week in order to show what can be done. So as Naomi was saying, there are several factors that can limit water security, and what is important to see is that many of those are related to land use. So these dimensions of water insecurity are linked to no, limited or inadequate access, the fact that water is too polluted, too little water, too much water. And when we look at what factors are bringing that together, there's multiple factors, but of course how we use water at the level of different sectors is very important. So it cuts across multiple economic sectors. And so restoring ecosystems is essential. This is what we call nature-based solutions, which can take many forms. And for DFIs, what they can do is that they can, for DFIs or any investors in the sector, they can consider nature-based solutions as either as an add-on to an existing built system or intentionally plan it and integrate it into a growing development. And this is what we are looking to encourage as a behavior much more going forward, so that we can leapfrog and really integrate NBS. So what are NBS, nature-based solutions? They are measures aimed at protecting, conserving, restoring, sustaining, and managing terrestrial, freshwater, natural, and modified coastal and marine ecosystems. And the important thing is that we're looking to address specific social, economic, and environmental issue in an adaptive manner, putting both human well-being and ecosystem health at the heart of decision-making. So in terms of water security, there are 4 main types of nature-based solutions that can be considered, and it's important to have those in mind so that it's not just limited to what some people would think of immediately, which are created natural solutions. Because when you talk to a city authority or development finance institutions, most of them would tend to think of it in terms of the creation of a constructed wetland, an urban park, for example. But what is important to highlight is that it can be much broader than that. And the more you look at protection, restoration, or management, the more you can effectively deliver impact at scale. Protection is, of course, the first step because it's always cheaper and more effective to protect what exists rather than degrade an environment and then restore it. And in fact, the Nature Conservancy did a very interesting report last year about the value of protecting forest for Sao Paulo that they call the invisible reservoir. So what could have been saved in terms of construction of water storage capacity had you protected the forests surrounding Sao Paulo. Restoration is the next big step, and in Europe, for example, where I was working with TNC colleagues, that was one of the key focus because we don't have much pristine or environment that can deliver these water security benefits, and that goes hand in hand with management, agricultural best practices, ranging forestry managing practices, which are very critical. And the advantage of nature-based solutions is that they can provide not only water security benefits, so in these three realms that we discussed, but they also, and that's the advantage, can help with climate change adaptation, mitigation, biodiversity, of course, human health and well-being, and job and social cohesion, bearing in mind that many of these solutions need to be undertaken in upstream basins, for example, so it helps with addressing the rural-urban divide that is a key blocking factor of a just transition towards climate adaptation. So one of the beauty and downside of nature-based solutions is because they generate all these multiple benefits that you see, I hope, on the left-hand side. There are multiple beneficiaries that can be interested potentially in investing in those solutions. One of the key areas of focus of organizations such as TNC is water utilities. How could they effectively invest more in NBS in order to either address turbidity or increase availability of water, address issues of water pollution? And interestingly, because we're talking about DFIs, this is also often a key client, if you want, of development finance institutions who tend to lend to either municipal authorities or utilities that are in charge of delivering the service. But most of the time, they want to pay their fair share. They don't want to pay extra, and effectively, because there are so many other actors in the basin who can benefit, it's important to identify who these beneficiaries are, which could be either other water-dependent corporates, the bottlers, the breweries, textile manufacturers who depend on that same resource, hydropower production, farmers in the area, but also local communities, ecotourism opportunities, etc. So it's only by identifying who these other beneficiaries are that we can effectively mobilize the full range of revenue streams that can contribute to funding those activities. So the range of the revenue streams is what appears on the right-hand side, and that could include environmental tariffs, payment for ecosystem services, subsidies, and what we observe is that in many cases, subsidies still is the vast majority of what is being paid for nature-based solutions for water, but also for farming, for a whole range of activities. So it's important to be comprehensive in how we assess what funding can come through. But there might be also commercial revenues, revenues from selling byproducts, the wood, or of a sustainably managed forest, or other opportunities, and then of course, water fees and ecotourism. This analysis was done by TNC in collaboration with the World Water Council, where we looked at a range of models in terms of how these revenue streams can be combined together. But the bottom line is it is a complicated endeavor, if you want, to bring together all of these revenue streams, and which is why organizations like TNC look to set up water funds that effectively bring those different revenue streams together in a single package that can also attract repayable financing if that is something that is of interest. But this complexity is effectively what Naomi was alluding to, is that there is limited funding that is going to NBS and to nature-related, to watershed-related investment when compared to grey infrastructure. That exact figure is relatively difficult to track, and TNC and Forest Trends are conducting an exercise to update the numbers that were compiled 5 years ago. It's an ongoing effort that the OECD is looking to support as well, because we recognize that there is a need for this data. So coming to the role of DFIs, because DFIs obviously are increasing their support to the water sector. We know that the World Bank, for example, is looking to build up its water portfolio. We collectively think that DFIs have a substantial role that they can play in order to increase the share of NBS because they have networks, they can in some way influence the definition of projects working together with governments, and a number of them are already doing it. So I referred in the introduction to these consultations that have been going on behind the scenes. And we found that most of the leading DFIs in the water sector, be ADB, World Bank, IADB, EIB, are all looking to do something and have a biodiversity strategy, have a climate change strategy that gives them the right drivers, if you want, to increase these levels of investment. But they all also face similar challenges, because their direct counterparts often lack familiarity with those solutions. They don't see it as a proper investment. Many of the solutions, as I mentioned, are related to management of best management practices, so they are not necessarily compatible with DFI funding as currently structured, which focuses on investments and upfront support. Interestingly, they cite also the lack of supportive policy and governance frameworks, and that's where organizations like the OECD or NGOs can come in order to foster the adoption of the right type of policy frameworks. But there's also a difficulty to understand the benefits, lack of metrics, which are common, difficulty to mobilize technical expertise on these subjects, and the length of time that is required to address these issues, something that TNC has looked to address with the setting up of a Nature for Water facility, which is a technical assistance platform that is delivering targeted technical assistance to elaborate large-scale NBS investments, etc. So you can read that here. I think from an OECD perspective, what we are really interested to support is looking at where policy hurdles can be addressed to give priority to NBS investments. And there is a direct link with how DFI can frame their support, because a lot of DFIs are moving towards policy-based loans or results-based loan, and they need to define payment triggers for that. So identifying what are the policy changes that would make a difference. It could be to do with mandating, for example, an analysis of green infrastructure alongside a grey infrastructure assessment. Or it could be a change in tariff policy so as to allow tariffs to cover the cost of an NBS, something that Peru has done, for example. So all of these, there's a need for exchanging best practices and fostering the adoption of these policies. This is something that we are doing. There's, for example, I'm pointing here to an example of work carried out by the OECD in Georgia, where we really looked at how a river basin management plan in Georgia, which needs to align with the Water Framework Directive, could incorporate at all its level green infrastructure and NBS. So that was done in partnership with the government so that they can evolve in their thinking. But we also think that there's a need for bringing more analytical work together at the global level to estimate benefits and costs. It's very granular, but still there's a lot of individual expertise and experience that has been done in multiple countries that can be brought together and be made more broadly available to document and analyze economic instruments and financial approaches for NBS. For example, the OECD runs the PINE database, which brings together all environmental economic instruments, and we've been doing that for over 20 years. So that's a really good basis of data for understanding what we do. A need to improve monitoring as well, because obviously improvement in ecosystem health is very difficult to measure, but there are new monitoring techniques with eDNA, with isotope, with remote sensing technologies that can improve. So that requires investment and sharing of information. That's one of the things we're doing at the OECD. There's a lot of appetite from OECD countries on that, and we're supporting that. So we are, and that's a call to interest, we are planning to undertake analytical work and organize a financing water roundtable around this topic, bringing what we find in the water sector with the financing community, which is increasingly looking for opportunities to invest in nature, to invest in climate, and needs to focus on water. So just to wrap up, this is the focus of a discussion for today, as Naomi was saying. The idea is to better understand what some DFIs are doing. They're not all represented, but you had to take a pick, I suppose, to mainstream NBS for water security into their portfolio, then identify possible pathways to accelerate DFI's financing, and then hopefully identify also what other support institutions, NGOs, international organizations can do to facilitate rapid change on the topic, including through collective action and collective initiatives that could accelerate this effort rather than working side by side on the same topics. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sophie, for this introduction, which set the scene very well and also introduced very well the topic of our discussions today with the panel. If you have any questions for Sophie, please hold them and you'll be able to ask them during the Q&A session a bit later. And I'm going to now call our distinguished members of the panel to join me on the stage. So we're going to have Laurent Raspaud, representative from the French Development Agency, AFD. Laurent is a senior team leader at the Water and Sanitation Division. On the left, Lance Gore, Principal Water Resources Specialist at the Asian Development Bank. Then Peter Zapanos, Senior Water Management Specialist at the European Investment Bank. And last but not least, we'll have Zimin Mao, who is the Senior Water Specialist at the World Bank. So thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to ask you to reflect on the question that were introduced earlier by Sophie, and in particular on the following question. So what strategy have your organization deployed in order to increase the share of NBS into your water-related portfolio? And what do you see as the most promising strategies? And then we'll also discuss and try to identify what could be done further, and maybe with the support of other institutions in order to accelerate the funding of these kind of projects. So I'm going to start with AFD and Laurent. As the French Development Agency is a bilateral development bank that has very early taken commitments on climate finance and biodiversity finance, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how these commitments reflect into AFD's operation, particularly in terms, of course, of including more NBS into the projects that AFD is funding.
Sure. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll prepare obviously a few slides to answer this question. So first, I think it's important to start by presenting a little bit the global picture of our commitments to climate and nature, because I think they're really the core of why and how we are trying to tackle the question of NBS and how to integrate them in our water security projects. So AFD has a strong and numerous commitments to climate and nature. It's the first few bullets of that slide. We have the commitment to align 100% with the COP15 agreement, which means that we would not finance any project that would go against the objectives set out in this in the COP15. We aim for 50% of climate co-benefits on the overall commitments of AFD, 1/3 of which should be dedicated to adaptation. So we try to focus and force a little bit the share of adaptation within the climate finance that we provide. In terms of biodiversity, we have a commitment of having 1 billion euros of yearly commitment for nature by 2025. Actually, I think we're almost there already, so we'll probably review that objective and try to go stronger on that. And I think this is an interesting one. The last point is that 30% of our total climate finance should also yield biodiversity co-benefits. So this is interesting because in there, there is clearly the basis for a strong NBS commitment. So indeed, NBS is really at the core of this convergence of climate and nature agenda. And so we try to mainstream biodiversity, well, apart from really supporting biodiversity protection and restoration, we also have the strategy to mainstream biodiversity in all of the sectors that AFD is active. We set up a dedicated tag in our information system to monitor the NBS project. Because yes, it's not so easy to know how much we dedicate to NBS in our projects. So we try to have that first baseline before we set out any ambitious objectives on that topic. And we set out to mainstream and to streamline NBS in all of our operational tools, in the terms of reference, in the climate screening tools, etc. And the last global strategy that we have in favor of NBS is that we offer and we try to set up a training offer on different sectors dedicated to AFD staffs, but also to partners and counterparts. So we have also two key and strategic partnerships to help us do that. The first one is with IUCN to try to design those mainstream streamlining tools that I mentioned earlier, the standards, portfolio analysis, to try to understand better how we can integrate NBS in our global portfolio. And then we have also a key partnership with the Nature Conservancy, focused really on the NBS for water security. And you'll see that during this short presentation, I will quote TNC quite a lot. So maybe now a focus on the water and sanitation sector. So we believe it's a major contributor to the climate and nature agenda. But as I mentioned earlier, we don't have much figure on how much we put on NBS. What we know is that last year, for instance, we committed 1.8 billion to the wash sector, but we don't really know how much for NBS. What we do know is that we have reached 89% of climate co-benefit and 25% of biodiversity co-benefit. How much of that is really related to integrating nature to our infrastructure portfolio? We're still working on that. On the right side of the slide, I showed a few barriers, but Sophie also mentioned them earlier. But I think it's important to remind them. First, AFD is driven by demand. We respond to the demand of our borrowers and our counterparts. And so the demand is mainly on grey infrastructure, on the wash sector. So we have to do that work to try to advocate and to convince and to integrate and to show the benefit of integrating nature into those projects. I think one key also element is that there is a persistent misunderstanding, not only with our partners, but also internally at AFD, about what we're talking about in terms of NBS. I think there's a common misunderstanding that NBS can be conceived as a ecological engineering, like we do a few constructed wetlands, so that qualifies as NBS. I'm not saying that constructed wetlands are bad, but I think what we're talking about when we talk about NBS is a more global approach with a concrete and a significant biodiversity co-benefit. So this is not always very clear for our partners and internally. And also, and Sophie mentioned it also, but there's a reluctance, I think, to engage in NBS because they are perceived as complex or not suited to the partners we're working with. So what do we do? And this is the last part of that slide. And we've done much of that within the framework of the partnership with TNC. So TNC has produced guidelines to integrate NBS for water security projects. And also internally at AFD, we have worked a lot to try to set the frame for how could we integrate biodiversity within the wash sector projects. And so this gives a concrete examples of how, when you come up with a wastewater project, how can we start the dialogue with the counterpart to try to integrate biodiversity and NBS. We also, within the partnership with TNC, organize yearly training dedicated to project teams. And when I say project teams, I mean AFD staff, but also our counterparts, to try to really concretely, based on a proposal of a project, try to see how we could integrate better NBS. And this has been quite a productive approach. I think this is how we develop most of our NBS portfolio within the wash sector. And finally, and I think this is how what I'm going to illustrate with the last slide, is that we need to dedicate efforts for long-term dialogue and advocacy to integrate NBS. We have the opportunity as a DFI to have long-standing relationships with partners. Usually it's not really one shot, it's projects after projects, and try to, within that framework, try to integrate NPS. So the last slide is dedicated to a few examples of how we believe we could build to try to do more NBS. The first one, I wanted to mention the fact that we've been supporting for a long time now river basin organizations, and we believe that it's an interesting framework to try to push for NBS because they're dedicated to water management, but also land management at the catchment level, which is the relevant scale to promote NBS. So we've been in the past, and we're still promoting, reinforcing the knowledge about water resources. This is key, and also supporting participative basin-wide planning, water resource planning. And we believe that those two pillars could be complemented by how can we integrate NBS within the investment program linked to the water resource planning. So the last example of the support that we've been providing is a Dinoba project, building on 15 years of experience to the African river basin organizations, and we try to integrate NBS within that project. Second example is interesting also, is the Senegal example. In Senegal, we've been working for decades also in the water sector and investing a lot in grey infrastructure, especially for water supply in Dakar. Lastly, we've been involved in the KMS project, which intends on building a 250 kilometers long adduction water supply transport to the capital city. And through dialogue with the partners, year after year, we succeeded in integrating NBS. We mobilized TNC to do a feasibility through a seed fund called adaptation, and which eventually ended up by giving a 6 million euro project to try to protect a strategic aquifer, the Put aquifer, based on NBS. Third and final example, and I'll end with that, is our work in Brazil, which is only beginning, but we hope that it will be fruitful. We have a strong and growing portfolio in Brazil, and we have two examples where NBS are clearly a key focus. In Minas Gerais, we have entered in a financial relationship with Copasa, which is one of the major water supply operator in the country. And we have, jointly with TNC, engaged Copasa to try to support their Promanantiais program, which is already dedicated to protecting water resource. But we believe that we could do more and we could do better in terms of biodiversity co-benefits, and that's what we're trying to do. In Bahia, also, we have recently approved financing for a water and health project, with a strong focus on water resource. Initially, the demand was for 10 million, within that 130 million financing. There was a demand for 10 million for water resource protection through forest protection and restoration. But that was a general idea. We didn't know really where we were going to go, and so we mobilized the Nature for Water facility to do the pre-feasibility of that, and we're trying to narrow down the area of intervention and try to bring concrete solutions for water resource protection through NBS. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laurent, for this very comprehensive presentation. I think it's really nice to see the range of projects that you managed to fund and also the range of tools that you've mobilized internally and externally to try to increase the share of NBS into your portfolio. Also very interesting to see that you're now trying to track the NBS into your information system, because as Sophie said earlier, it's quite difficult to know exactly how much DFI are funding NBS, although it seems to be simple, but it's difficult to have accurate figures. Just one quick question before we move on to the next panelist. You mentioned the importance of policy dialogue in order to be able to bring those new topics into the upstream conversation that development finance institutions are having with their counterparts in order to identify the investment that they can support. As AFD is funding policy loans, do you see those instruments as having some potential to increase the channeling of public funding into NBS in the water sector in the countries where AFD is working?
Yes, definitely. This is one of the ideas we're trying to investigate. Public policy loan or development policy loan is one of the tools that we provide. Maybe a few conditions or a few barriers that we're encountering right now is that first we need to have a demand. So we do a few development policy loans in the water sector, but not that many. So we need to foster also that demand. We need to also have a clear understanding of what are the enabling conditions for nature-based solutions within the wash sector in order to integrate that into the development policy loan. And that's why also we're supporting what TNC is doing in terms of understanding better the general framework and the enabling conditions at the public policy level to foster more NBS investment. And lastly, I think we would also be very keen on engaging with other DFIs on that topic and try to co-finance this kind of tools because we're always stronger and for monitoring of such commitments when we're together.
Thank you. We're now going to give the floor to Peter Zapanos from the European Investment Bank. Yeah, you know that. So Peter, you're working for the European Investment Bank. So EIB is operating mostly, but not only in Europe, where the policy and legal framework is quite conducive for NBS investments. I would be curious to know if that translates into more opportunities for EIB to fund NBS projects.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here. So I think first maybe just to explain our standing as we are the long-term financing arm of the European Union. And going back to your question on strategy, that means that a lot of our strategies are driven by the European Union and the member states. So that means that we have to differentiate between inside and outside the EU. So inside the EU, when it comes to nature-based solutions, we are in a lucky position because nature-based solutions are very much driven by the EU Green Deal, which is a 2030 Green Deal that has clear biodiversity goals. And also there is the recent nature restoration law that also helps us. Because we work a lot with EU financial facilities, that means grants, TAs, investment grants. Automatically these policies automatically translate certain expectations inside these facilities. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the promoters are fully understand them. I'll come back to that later. But when it comes to the EIB's strategic commitment to MBS, that's really helpful. Also, the bank is in a little bit of a double bind these days because under our new water program, we need to significantly increase our commitment to adaptation, climate adaptation. And currently, the water-related investments constitute 60% of EIB's adaptation finance. That's the bank would like to increase, and the water area appears to be an attractive field. Also, the double bind is that it's unlikely that we will significantly increase our financial commitments to the water sector, which is currently at 4 billion euro, around 4 billion euro per year. So that means that we have to stretch the resources a lot further. That means that when it comes to nature-based solutions, I mean, that's no secret that they tend to be lower capex and also lower opex. So that means they are actually you can stretch the same budget to have a bigger impact. When it comes to outside the EU, it's obviously we cannot expect our promoters to follow EU directives and EU, but the policies, our policies based on the EU policies, these are the so-called the Global Gateway Strategy. And also certain Team Europe initiatives, which is a transboundary water management in Africa, the climate change and adaptation in Africa, or the green Team Europe initiative in Asia or in Africa and Southeast Asia. And also the EU has a regional strategies by these multi-annual indicative programs. So these facilities which we heavily use, to be honest. One of them we use is the guarantees provided by the EU because we have to de-risk our operations. That these strategies, these facilities also require a significant share of this investment dedicated to green or nature-based solutions. So that's, we cannot, if you want to use these guarantees, if you want to use these facilities, that we will have to find projects, we will have to develop projects with promoters that will bring this commitment. Unlike the AFD, we do not yet have a biodiversity, explicit biodiversity goal. I mean, our biodiversity commitment, as explained, they are at the moment implicit. We have quite explicit climate mitigation, adaptation targets and environmental sustainability targets, which based on last year's results, I think we have exceeded. So far for the strategy. On a more concrete level, on what type of actions have we done in the past few years? As I said, we rely a lot on the facilities provided by the EU. One of the facilities that we have implemented in the past 3 years, which was the Natural Capital Financing Facility. This was set up together with the EU, the Commission, and the EIB. It was around a 125 million euro facility, which was dedicated to provide technical assistance to promoters who wish to develop nature-based solutions. Beyond that, provided either equity participation in projects, first loss piece, for example, or direct investment loans. So. There were high expectations about this facility. The end result was that we came below the commitment. It was around 90 million that we were able to dedicate, and even the TA facility was not fully used. It was only, I think, 6 million was used out of the 10. There were smaller projects that we anticipated, so it was a lot more fragmented for us. There was a hope that we can attract through private equity, private financiers into these projects. That proved to be a lot more difficult than what we thought, because they were very difficult to actually have viable revenue streams from the private sector. So the payment for ecosystem services or other benefits, they were proved to be a bit trickier to quantify and make them attractive for the private investors. Also, we found that, which is, I think, Sophie already explained, that there is a framework, like legislative framework side. I think there is some gaps still. We have now a successor to the Nature Capital Financing Facility, which is so-called the Green Advisory Support Top-Up, which is the EU LIFE program. Under the so-called InvestEU program. We are currently pursuing a project. It's a very interesting one. It's in Belgium, in the Wallonie region. Probably you heard about that in 2021. They had a devastating flood in the region. And initially, when they came to us, they said, look, we want to rebuild to the same protection level or slightly improve. But the emphasis was very much on grey infrastructure, nothing more. So we started a dialogue with them, and it proved to be quite fertile, because now they opened seriously considering in their and mainstreaming in their planning procedure nature-based solutions. We are already in the process of setting up a technical assistance program for them, because it has already been mentioned that the nature-based solutions require still advocacy. There is some methodological issues that people are not familiar with, either the consultants, either the decision makers, for example, in flood management or river basin management agencies. This is we try to solve here. So it's a good example. Under the NCSF, we on non-water project, we were more successful in forestries, in peat marshes restorations. On water, we only had relatively small projects. One was in Luxembourg. It was a river restoration project. In Belgium was another one, and then in France, Eau de Paris, we had the biodiversity restoration project in their water catchment areas, and so that's our experience so far. For the issues, for the efforts we are making, it's now we on a regular basis we meet our clients inside the EU. That means river basin management authorities. That means major utilities. And now it's we try to meet them as much upstream as possible. That's not always possible because we also, like AFD mentioned, we are demand driven. But every opportunity we have, every horizontal platform we can access in the member states, we use these facilities to educate decision makers about the nature-based solutions. It's a difficult sell. I mean, there are issues. There is a myth around it. There is a methodology is just maybe not fully developed. I mean, from their point of view, not from us. But hopefully, slowly, we will able to turn the tide in this respect. We are very much grateful for TNC. To providing us the support, the training, even us needed training on MBS, and it's an ongoing dialogue as well. So that's from my side.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's very interesting also to hear that you're developing everything you can at upstream dialogue level in order to be able to bring those topics. And you mentioned the need for advocacy that is still there. So do you think that there is still a need to provide tangible examples to decision makers? It feels like NBS now is much more like it's famous, a bit more. So, what do you think is still missing to convince decision makers? Sorry.
Well, just based on EU, our experience, right? So, the more eastward you go, the less inclination for nature-based solutions, and there is automatically there are these grey solutions. A lot of the Eastern European Central states that they have plans, they are based on old plans, and they wish to implement this flood protection. However, I think there are two issues. One is that we need more examples showing that the same amount of money can be stretched a lot further, and NBS, I think, can deliver that. Very often we don't finance OPEX, for example, but very often we find that a lot of these agencies are cash trapped, so they don't have enough money. And also NBS offers a very attractive proposition when it comes to OPEX. One issue is that's perhaps internal, is that we need to, and I think it's a little bit of the missing link, is the kind of an agreed, maybe on an MDB level agreed methodology, how to monetize the ecosystem services, for example, because there are methodologies, then we know it can be used, but if, for example, the idea is that to attract more private capital into this arena, and there are a lot of funds who would be willing to invest, then they need perhaps a clearer metrics that they can take back to their shareholders, and they can say, look, we have invested and this was the outcome, because that's a field that work needs to be done.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the ADB. ADB, the Asian Development Bank, has launched recently many initiatives in order to be able to identify a bigger portfolio of NBS projects. Can you tell us a little bit more about this strategy?
With pleasure, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lance Gore, I'm from the Asian Development Bank. Pleasure to be here today. I'm going to show a few slides and then follow it with a short video and briefly give you an overview about how ADB is mainstreaming the use of nature-based solutions and our work with our developing member countries in terms of solutions, financing and knowledge. Let's start by acknowledging that there is already significant evidence on the benefits of using nature-based solutions, whether it's reforestation, afforestation, wetlands, mangroves, riparian planting. They all have their specific roles to play in terms of their primary purpose, be it increasing water retention within the watershed, allowing room for the river to move during floods or just natural movement, protection of riverbanks, protection of coastlines, and protection from floods and erosion. Of course, comprehensive solutions need to be considered, integrated or hybrid types of solutions that mix green and grey infrastructure along with policy actions and sustainable funding. With MBS, the real magic magic happens when we look away from the primary services they provide and look towards the secondary or co-benefits. These are harder to economically quantify, but here is where the MBS really shine, providing the ecosystem services, enhancing biodiversity, providing habitats to pollinators, reducing heat island effects, creating jobs, storing carbon, etc. The ADB has been investing in nature-based solutions for quite some time. Here we show just a few examples where we're providing policy advice on developing eco-compensation financing mechanisms in People's Republic of China, invested in sponge city mechanisms in China as well as Vietnam, mangrove restoration projects in India and Indonesia, and watershed management programs in India, Philippines and Nepal. And there's many other examples that we can also share, which would be on our website. In terms of financing, ADB also has a few financial and knowledge tools to help catalyse the uptake of nature-based solutions with our developing member countries. The first is our innovative natural capital financing facility, and this has three main pillars, which are Natural Capital Fund to provide catalyst concessional co-financing to projects, a Natural Capital Lab that promotes natural capital accounting, valuation and training, and the Agribusiness Services Platform to strengthen supply chains. Next, we have the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, which targets mobilising private sector or blended finance for MBS investments in the ASEAN region. And not shown here is also a third window called the Nature Solutions Financing Hub, which objective is to attract about $2 billion in concessional finance for nature-based investments, particularly focused on capital markets and sources of private capital. Lastly, but just as important as our financing, is our knowledge work on NBS. We've prepared many guidelines, training programs and study tours, publications and project case studies. These can all be found on our website too. And we have a short video which we'd like to share with you, which demonstrates how ADB engages with our developing member countries. This was from a recent study tour hosted by the Government of Netherlands. This is something we do every year with the Government of Netherlands, that they host learning weeks. And in this particular case, this year was focused on nature-based solutions. We brought 12 project teams from all over our region, Asia and the Pacific, who had a particular interest in incorporating nature-based solutions into their project, whether it's at the very early stages of conceiving the project, or whether it's they're already well down the path of designing the project, but there's still an opportunity to integrate some features of nature-based solutions. And this study tour really enabled our member countries to see how the Dutch have been using MBS to good effect, also get some of the lessons learned, successes and failures that the Dutch have experienced, and then also undertake a number of workshop sessions where they can really sit down with across the different teams. They can share their own experiences between the developing member countries, but they also get to have the access to the Dutch experts that were there during the time. So if we can roll with the video, that'd be great. Thank you.
We are in The Hague, the Netherlands, where we are co-hosting with the Netherlands Water Partnership a week-long Netherlands Water Learning Week. We have brought in nearly 50 delegates from 11 countries in Asia and the Pacific, and they are interacting with Dutch specialists about the nature-based solutions, which is the theme of this Learning Week this time.
It's important to have all these countries here because they come here with specific projects that can be improved through sharing knowledge, learning from each other, in application and financing of nature-based solutions.
60% of Asia-Pacific people still live in the rural area. Food security is critical. When the flood hit the Asia-Pacific, mostly affected people is the farmer in the rural area. So that's why linkage between the climate change and also the food insecurity is so critical.
The mixture of the nature-based solution to the conventional engineering approach will leverage the benefit of ecosystem services, biodiversity, and additional income stream for the people.
When we're talking about climate change and water insecurity, we have to look at the landscapes of the river basin, which involves multiple different types of land uses. And so nature-based solutions is providing a way to help resolve some of those common problems and provide the benefits.
I think an importance of a week like this is that it provides an opportunity for us, so let's say the Dutch water sector and all related sectors, to connect that knowledge and experience with the challenges that currently exist, in this case, in the Asian project countries. And I think also that's why the ADB, in this case, Netherlands Water Partnership, work well together.
This week is very important for the overall learning perspective, as well as to gain the practical experiences from the actual implementation of the projects.
So they say seeing is believing, and this is what actually we feel here, because when we come here we learn a lot of the innovative solutions that the Dutch have been implementing, and we believe that we can adopt those solutions to the context of my project.
That's it? Okay, so there you go. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lance, and thank you for sharing this video. I think it's a very good illustration of the importance of internal capacity building, but also peer-to-peer network of exchanges. Yeah. In the interest of time, we're going to now move on to the World Bank, which is also an organization which has made a lot of efforts and invested a lot in NBS recently. I mean, not only recently, but more and more. Can you tell us a bit more about the World Bank efforts in mainstreaming NBS, in particular about how you advocate with your clients and counterparts to convince them to integrate NBS into their investment?
Thank you. It's very nice to be here, and thank you for joining the session. So my name is Zhiming Mao. I'm a senior water specialist from World Bank. So in the bank side, our efforts on NBS, mainstreaming nature-based solution, is driven by several our objectives, right? The achievement of the SDGs, but also more recently our commitment to climate change and then the related co-benefits. And then we consider nature-based solution as a very important aspect, their solution part of it. So to mainstream it, especially for our project development and a dialogue with clients, we have set up this global program for nature-based solutions and try to support both the dialogue and project teams through three main aspects. One is the knowledge development, and then the second one is technical support to actual project operations. And then lastly, we also try to maintain and foster partnerships with key stakeholders. In terms of knowledge from the water global practice, we have this report titled Integrating Green and Gray, setting up the basis for a few additional publications. For example, what we call the EPIC response to flooding and droughts. And also more recently, we have this new report named Economics of Groundwater, which also touches upon, how can we introduce nature-based solutions to help countries address their groundwater challenges. These are the publications that more focus on the dialogue with the government at the policy level. But then we also published publications like cost-benefit analysis of nature-based solutions. And also we have this catalog on urban nature-based solutions. These are more project-focused, very detailed guidelines in terms of how do you conduct proper cost-benefit analysis, how do you assess the feasibility of the project at different phases of the project. That goes into a lot more details in terms of the implementation side. And then on supporting the projects, there are mainly focused on 5 different angles. There are just-in-time support for the project team. And then we also provide what we call the opportunity scan and cost-benefit analysis. These are more at the earlier stage of the project, even scoping and identification. For example, I led a project a few years ago that was anchored around a gray infrastructure, but we wanted to introduce more these nature-based solutions upstream, but faced a little bit difficulties with the client because we convinced the line ministry, but the higher level was not convinced that this is a reason for them to borrow for. So we actually relied on this support, technical support, to help us do a scanning of what are the opportunities at the local level and what are the cost benefits of this project that can bring in addition to this gray infrastructure. For example, it can elongate the project lifetime, and then reduce the erosion, and also increase community ownership, because people love what they own, right? You can't just build something, put it in their backyard, and then they might just forget about it. But having some of these added natural-based solutions, we were able to improve the community ownership. So that was a very helpful practice from my perspective, getting that kind of support. And in addition, they can also help us to do pre-feasibility studies and feasibility studies once a project has been identified. And then also, additionally, they can provide even implementation support. And lastly, recently, the World Bank introduced one additional strategic document called Climate Change and Development Report. The aim of this report is to help our dialogue with the Ministry of Finance in terms of understanding what's the benefits of climate change mitigation adaptation efforts at the financing level. And then we are also trying to embed some of this nature-based solution into the national report development. So then you can have the highest level of dialogue when it's ready. And lastly, we also try to foster partnership, both inside and outside the bank. Outside the bank, we're working with NGOs, we're working with private sector, ProGreen, ProBlue, and this global partnership for sustainable cities, for example, and also MBS Invest. So we're really trying to work with the best thinkers in nature-based solution globally, because as other colleagues on the panel mentioned, it's still evolving. in terms of how do we mainstream and understanding, and then nature-based solutions. So we are also trying to maintain and foster partnerships outside. And internally, project development often involves a multidisciplinary team when you are trying to integrate green and green infrastructure together. So we're also trying to improve our internal understanding of how can you work together, how do you facilitate or form a team that can allow that kind of project development to happen. So these are the three main aspects we are trying to push forward to mainstream nature-based solutions. And I can also share with you one of the recent example under our water global practice, which is a flood risk reduction project in northern provinces in Argentina. It's a three-phased, what we call the multi-phased approach MPA program, $1 billion, and then it actually integrates nature-based solutions. We are integrating drainage areas in watersheds in some of these northern cities, and then also trying to use this to develop even additional investments. So needless to say, we are definitely trying to integrate nature-based solutions as much as possible into our portfolio through all these different efforts. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimin. And I think it was good to remind us that development finance institutions mainly provide loans. And as you said, with the upstream policy dialogue, you need to convince the technical ministry, but also the Ministry of Economy and Finance, because they need to be convinced that it's worth borrowing money for these kind of projects. And making the case from an economic and financial standpoint can be really critical for that. Before we move on to the Q&A session, just one last question to all of you, and I'd like you to answer very quickly. Are you able to identify what support other institutions can do to facilitate rapid change on the topic, on top of the efforts that you're already doing and the efforts that the governments are also already doing? Lance?
Yeah, I think there's a role here for insurance companies, because I think if we're promoting the use of MBS for flood and erosion defence, the insurance need to make sure that they're comfortable with that, because they're going to be insuring the assets and the properties behind it. So I think there still needs to be a lot of work done there.
Thank you. Any other thought?
If I may add, on a EU level, for example, I think a lot of these action plans, other directives, they have very concrete targets that the member states they have to hit. Like, for example, the renewable energy directive has concrete timelines and percentages that member states have to hit. Otherwise, they face penalties. Now it's a kind of a negative sort of effect, but why not in the biodiversity arena? I think ultimately these should be targets somehow. I don't know right now how that target would look like, but potentially that would energize promoters and member states.
Laurent?
Yeah, I don't like to put the blame on somebody else, but I must say that sometimes it's difficult to get engineering firms that are involved in feasibility or early design of the projects to really include NBS. We try to put that in our terms of reference, maybe in a true standardized manner, but the result is often disappointing. So maybe there's a need to reinforce also our dialogue with the engineering firms.
Thank you.
Now it's bring to the project level. I also want to say involving local community to understand the true benefits of this nature-based solution is very important. Just a desktop review will not give you the richness of some of this, and then the argument often become much stronger when you have talked to the locals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can now move on to the Q&A session. I will ask Sophie to join the panel. So if you have any question, please raise your hand, and there's also a chat window for online questions. And I think there's a microphone somewhere. Yeah. I think... Okay. Yeah. And before you speak, can you please tell your name and the organization you're working for? Thank you.
Hello, this is Christoph Schmant from the EU Water Facility. Key aspect, key challenge is that NBS is typically land intensive, and that land costs must be considered in such an investment. Often DFIs have the restriction of not providing land costs into their investment portfolios. How do you address that? Is that passed on to national governments, etc.? And how do you, from the bottom up, get small landholders involved who expect a profit or return on their land? Thank you.
We're going to take a couple of more questions and then go back to the panel. There's a hand raised here.
Thank you very much. My name is Professor Jafet Onyando from Ijero University, Kenya. We also work in a project called Catchment to Tap, where we have a number of partners involved, including WWF, World Water Net, and VEI. So my question is, what is the duration for return to investments for nature-based solutions? Because when private sector is involved, they want to see that their investments will yield some profit at the end of the day. Then secondly, in terms of conservation and consumption, there need to be a balance, because communities are looking at the use of natural resources to increase their benefit. So if they are doing conservation to improve for nature-based solutions, does your programs also include benefits in terms of what they do to improve their income, the balance between conservation and consumption of resources? And then, of course, the demographic patterns are a threat to nature-based solutions, especially in African countries where there's uncontrolled settlement of communities. How do you balance all these to ensure that nature-based solutions will be sustainable? Thank you very much.
Hi, Namaste. This is Raju Tirua, working as a gender disability and social inclusion specialist from Sustainable Wash for All SUSWA project. It is funded by the Government of Finland, Government of Nepal, and European Union. This is from Nepal. So thank you very much for your very good information and very good effort you are making here. So just I would like to have one question regarding, actually the question is for the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank. Your effort in globally for the wash sector is very, very important and very significant. So as I explained from Nepal, my question is that actually this nature-based solution is one of the good means to ensure the sustainable wash services. So are there any, just conditions to ensure this water-based solutions while funding you? Because you are funding whether from loan aspect also, sometimes you are also providing grants. So are there conditions to ensure this water-based solution to make the water services sustainable? Thank you.
Thank you. This is Nirajan Sreshta. I'm also the same. I am working in a sustainable wash for all project in Nepal that our colleagues mentioned already. Regarding my question is what are the most promising strategy for the vulnerable communities to address the upstream and downstream linkage in the water basin? That I want to know about your strategy, most promising strategy, how we linkage these vulnerable communities in the upstream as well as in downstream linkage. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're gonna stop here and start answering the questions. Maybe we can start by the last one, and I will wondering Ziming, because I know that the World Bank is promoting NBS, particularly in vulnerable and fragile contexts, whether you had an answer to provide.
Thank you. Let me clarify. We are not necessarily promoting NBS in fragile context. It just happened that large infrastructure sometimes is not feasible in those contexts, and then, community-driven, small-scale, nature-based solution, it just happened become a viable solution. And then, hearing the question, a lot of them are very project and then technical specific, and then I think maybe let me just respond with one go. I think we are assessing the nature-based solution project just like other projects, right? We have to look at the financial, technical, legal, institutional, and social aspects of it before we, give the green light to go. So I think a lot of this question is not unique to nature-based solutions. For other projects, we'll face the same. And then largely, we follow the same kind of principle when we are approaching this. And then one of the challenges I think we face when assessing nature-based solution is uncertainty in terms of achieving the benefits and also estimating the costs compared to a typical gray infrastructure, which includes the social aspects, the environmental aspects during implementation. And I think that's something collectively we should probably exchange experiences and then try to figure out how to address some of them, even during the project preparation stage, listing out, what are the mitigation strategies of these anticipated uncertainties. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wants to add on to this?
Sure. Just to address the questions from Team Nepal up there. So we do a lot of work in Nepal, looking at river basin management. We rely on, of course, following the good practices of integrated water resources management. When we look at doing river basin planning, we work with governments on that, but we also particularly work with the communities. We're currently preparing one project in the far west Nepal called the Climate Resilient Landscapes and Livelihoods Project. This is very much focused on nature-based solutions. This is where we're looking at watershed management and looking at afforestation projects where we can use the new forests as sources for medicinal plants to stimulate the local communities' economies. Also to ensure that there's good water runoff, which they can then use in their irrigation systems for food production and so forth. And designing these projects really is a community-led approach. We make sure that the community's involved and participatory approaches are followed in the design of those projects. Just echoing what the colleague from the World Bank said, whether it's loan or grant, it doesn't matter how we approach the design and preparation of a project. The projects have to stand on their own economic feet. They have to meet certain conditions for that, and they have to be sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you. Any thought on the question related to the land use costs, Sophie?
Thank you for your question. Can you hear me? Or how should
I think they can hear you.
Yeah. I think one important, clearly land can constitute one of the land costs can constitute one of the major components of these projects, but it's not always necessary to buy land. So effectively, you can engage with farmers directly and linking to the other question, making the case to farmers that it makes sense for them to invest in those kind of projects. So this is a key issue that when I was at TNC, we had to tackle in Europe because it's just not possible to buy land. So in the UK, we were engaging directly with farmers, and I think what was interesting to see is that a lot of the initiative for the project actually came from farmers who saw the need to transform their business model with the drop in EU subsidies for farming or the uncertainty associated with the change in those subsidies. But that came with a parallel sort of creation of markets for ecosystem services, for nutrients, for biodiversity. So and that's why it links to policies as well, because if you want to make this attractive for landowners, then it's important to have the right type of economic instruments in place in order to remunerate farmers for the provision of these ecosystem services, allow payment for ecosystem services. That was a very important change that facilitated the European Investment Bank and the sort of activity in Eau de Paris, which effectively obtained a change from the EU so that their payments to farmers upstream in their basin could be authorized and would not be treated as subsidies and therefore sort of public grants, something that they were not allowed to do as a utility. So identifying what a utility can do or not do and allowing them to make those transfers from tariffs or other sources is another sort of key policy trigger that can create those markets for ecosystem services or this payment for ecosystem services that make use of land viable.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I don't think we have time for another round of questions, even though I think we also have some questions online. Brooke, maybe, just one question online.
Well, it's up to you, Naomi. We have like 2 good questions from online, so we could forego them in terms of instead of closing remarks. What would you prefer? Okay.
Let's have the questions.
Okay, so a lot of you guys spoke about the kind of enabling conditions and policy drivers because you all are demand driven. So you can only really service demand that is surfaced to you. So as you're engaging in these conversations, if you could have anything to better support, enable that, like a wish list of sorts, what would be that 1 or 2 things that you would need to help unlock more of those dialogues? So that's the first question. And then the second question is that many of you noted that you've either exceeded or nearly met many of the targets that you initially set out. And so are you seeing the changes that you expected to see when you originally set those goals at the outset? Or are you thinking that now that you've met or achieved many of these, you might need to move the goalpost because you're not seeing those changes? I know it was controversial.
No. So what would help us to enable good policy discussions? I think we still need a lot more data and facts on just what the benefits of NBS provide. Every type of NBS and every type of situation it's going to have different returns, different types of benefits, co-benefits and so forth. You know, being able to go to the Ministry of Finance, and that's really the people that you have to convince because they're generally taking the loan for it. They want to make sure that there's going to be an economic return for them, that they're not going to have to maintain this NBS. It's going to cost more to maintain it. They're going to want to make sure that it's going to be quite sustainable for a long time, that they're not going to have to come back and replace it in a certain period of time. So I think still collection, warehousing of that information, making it easily accessible, would go a long way with helping us with policy discussions. Someone else can follow the other one.
Yeah, I'll go. On the question of the objectives, let me just comment on our experience. We mentioned earlier the question of monitoring and knowing how much we put on NBS. This is part of the answer because I think this is all we're setting up this framework for monitoring, so we need to adjust the objectives also according to the tools that we are using for monitoring our commitments. And my personal view on should we move the target or is the change already occurring is that I think we should review the ambition of the objective in order to try to go further because, well, what we can see at least at AFD is that nature-based solutions are not mainstream. We're still working quite hard on each project to try to have them on board. So I think we need to have more ambitious targets in the end.
Well, if I may just add on the first question in terms of what additional we need. So of course we want to get the cost benefit right, convinced that. But then after that, I think it's also important to work with the government to see, how can we embed some of this nature-based solution thinking in the planning documents, and then the priorities, if it's true, it proves to be true, right? Because that will also help trickle down that into dialogue at the project level. So.
Just if I may add for the first question, I think planning agencies are very important that we have to convince, so it's a lot of awareness raising, advocacy, but at the end of the day, most of the decisions in terms of engaging an IFI, not engaging, having a loan, it boils down to the Ministry of Finances or that level of agencies. So in that respect, at least just from EIB's perspective, I think we need to do a better sales pitch to these people because that's CapEx, OpEx, cost benefit, long-term OpEx. So these are the language they understand, and the less impact on the budget, for example, the happier they are. So I think that's the key.
Sophie?
Well, I just want to say also, in terms of creating demand, showing that these are not inferior solutions, but they are, cost-effective, as you were saying. So I was struck by the film that you made, for the Netherlands-Asia exchange, because I think there's a lot of experience, in fact, in OECD countries that can be brought to the fore in a way that can be understood by countries in the global south, and that may sort of contribute as well to elevate the standing of those solutions, because there is a bit of an image problem, I think, associated with NBS. It's something that is seen a little bit as inferior or solution for the poor, etc. So really addressing that topic head on and show that this is the future, not the past or not a sub-past solution would go a long way.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your speeches and answering all those questions. Please give a big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much for attending this session, and on your way out of the room, please take a look at the drawing that our distinguished visual artist has been doing during all this session to try to capture the content of our discussions. Thank you.